This is 5 Live Boxing.
It took 5 years to make it happen, and when it did, a genuine superstar for the ages emerged in Las Vegas. Terence Crawford is not just the full unified welterweight champion of the world, he is one of the greatest fighters of the modern era. And he proved it in the ring by stopping previously unbeaten Errol Spence. We thought it was a 50-50 fight, and we were wrong. I'm Steve Bunt, and this is 5 Live Boxing. So, Barry Jones, I'm envious, I'm not going to lie. Where do I find you? Where are you now? I'm assuming you're by the swimming pool with a pina colada, or you're at a gambling table, or you're at Terence Crawford's private after party, or you're drowning your sorrows with Derek James and Errol Spence and the rest of that gang. Where are you right now, Barry? And as you can tell, I'm not in the mood for messing around, so tell me exactly where you are.
Well, we were ringside originally, Steve, but waiting for you to mess around to get your slippers on, your butler to make your tea, and and all the rest of it. We've had to move to the media room, which is nice and air conditioned and lovely. So yeah, we're right next in a tent of all places. The media room's a tent, and they're right next to the T-Mobile Centre. So yeah, it's but it's still buzzing.
So Barry, what was your two reactions, Barry? I want your reaction once it had started, 10, 20 seconds into the first round, or maybe midway through the first round, and then your reaction as you just watched what was, as I've said, a masterclass.
Well, the bell went. There's been a tingle of excitement all the way through tonight, and the bell went, and it was tentative, as you expect, but they were both looking to work, and that was surprising, because I didn't think Crawford would be looking to work so early. But nothing much landed, and I think maybe Errol Spence just nicked that first round, and that was it for him. To be honest,
it really is that simple, Barry. That was his round.
Yes, it is.
That was the round where they were feeling each other, getting the taste for each other, and then after that, rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the stoppage in the 9th. It was all Terence Bud Crawford.
Well, I thought Spence had a good second round. He was having a good second round, but then all of a sudden, with Crawford on the ropes, he made Spence miss. And we know how good Crawford is. He punches off your punches. And he did that continuously tonight. But in the second round is when that really it clicked for him so early. He was on the ropes, he made Spence miss, and he come back then with a left hand and a right hand, and Spence was on his back. Or on his backside, I should say. He got up, a little bit unsteady on his legs, but the bell saved him. Crawford didn't have time to finish that round. But then in round 3, Spence come on fast again, Steve. But there was a panic to his work. It was a different, you know what I mean? You understand that? There was a little bit of a difference. He was trying to work, but he just knew he had to try and grab that round back.
So he was kind of flat out just to stay in the fight, just to impose himself. And of course, that against someone like Terence Crawford, that leaves you exposed.
Yeah, Crawford was so composed all throughout the contest, Steve. He really was. And in our third round again, even though Spence came out fast, he stayed nice and composed and relaxed Crawford, and then took over that round. 3 and 4 was the same. Spence, to be fair, Spence throughout the fight tried to win, tried to gain some ground back, and he had little pockets of success. But even the shots he landed with, the big shots he landed with, he couldn't really make a dent or even make Crawford take a step back. And what was really worrying for Spence and was shocking was that not that Crawford won the battle of the jabs, the weight of the jab was in Crawford's favour. I mean, the jab won Crawford the fight. I mean, the punches that put him down and the punches that finished the fight were hooks and uppercuts, but the jab, that southpaw right jab of Crawford was like a ramrod, Steve. You could see the pain in Spence's face when he landed with it. He was stepping behind it. He was using the forward momentum of Spence, to ram that jab right in his face. And the face of Spence early on was already puffed up, and it was all to do with that jab.
So Barry, at what point in I don't know if it's in rounds 3 and 4 and 5, at what point are you thinking this is surprising, this 50-50 fight, this incredible fight that we've been waiting for, one man is taking control. At what point were you wondering if something could change, or if this was it? It was just going to be a Crawford breeze, masterclass, shutout, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I wasn't quite sure. I think I was surprised how fast Crawford started, because notoriously, he's known to take his time and have a look at you. But he knew in this fight he had to start fast, as did Spence. But there was enough success from Spence to think maybe, possibly, if he can just build a little bit more on that, that it'll work for him. But I think round 6 for me, that was the one where I just thought he was punching off. He started to do what he does so well: punch off your punches. So you throw a shot, it doesn't have success, and he chins you really quick, and that makes you panic. And then from there on, especially then in the 7th round, then when he dropped Spence with a lovely right hook first of all, hit Spence on the foot. He gets up at Spence again, hits him with a double right hook. A real cheeky, disrespectful combination. That is, that.
It is. Yeah, at that level.
Yeah, and then you thought, then you're starting to think, do maybe Derek James pull him out? No, but in a fight of this magnitude, I understand he doesn't, but there was enough times in that fight where Spence looked a little bit unsteady. The doctor was constantly in the corner of Spence from early in the fight, Steve. I would have to say that. At one point, I think it was about round 6 again. At the start of round 7, possibly, before he got knocked down, they were. I think the doctor was talking to Spence to see if he were okay, and he was going, "I'm fine," but he didn't look fine.
Yeah, when he's walking back to the corner, not necessarily in the 7th when he was dropped twice, but let's say in the 5th and the 6th, as he's going back to the corner, I know you do what I do. You'd be looking at him and looking at Derek James. Could you see maybe some concern on Derek James's face? This is in the 5th or 6th before we get to the 7th when he was dropped twice.
Yeah, you could, because they were trying to do what they do best: be aggressive, be busy. But he was missing too frequently. Crawford's lateral movement, as we know, is great, worked really well. But more importantly, the strength of Spence wasn't a factor. And it wasn't that he couldn't impose himself; he could. But Crawford matched it for strength. I'll tell you what Crawford did really, really well. He grabbed hold of the right hand of Spence. When they got in close, he didn't even hide it. He grabbed hold of the right hand. Never got warned for it, because he turned his body away from the referee and hid it. So clever. And that didn't allow Spence to work inside the things he does so well. And also, what Spence does so well, sorry, Steve, with using that forehand to create the space to throw that uppercut.
Couldn't do it.
He couldn't do it. He took away his game.
So why wasn't Derek James screaming at the referee after rounds 2 and 3 and 4? The old Mickey Duff, the great British boxing promoter and manager, he would have been in the referee's face in the ring, scaring the life out of the referee. The next moment that Crawford grabbed hold of the right hand, he would have been screaming. The referee would have panicked and ended up breaking. Why wasn't that happening? Sounds like a bit naive.
No, but you know why? Because any adversity Spence has had, they've overcome it.
Absolutely.
They haven't been in this position before where things haven't worked for him. I mean, on a big scale, on a grand scale, consistently things you're good at are not working at all. Where they've had times in fights where they've had to dig in deep, but in the end, they could see the plan was working slowly and surely, and they knew they were going to get success. In this fight, nothing was working. Even when he did have little pockets of success, nothing was working for him. There was no dent at all in Crawford.
Barry, let's take it back a little bit. I spoke during the week from your position out there in Las Vegas. I mean, I acknowledge now that you are in Las Vegas. Okay, I must admit. I did sell a story that you're in it. So much so that when I was at the fights in Telford, I was asked a couple of times if you really were in a studio near Heathrow. Yeah. And I said, no, he did actually get on a plane and he is somewhere and it's probably Las Vegas. Let's take it back to if we can, let's go back 2 or 3 days before the fight. It seemed to me that most people, certainly that I was looking at and follow on Twitter or spoke to, you included, fancied Crawford. But were there any voices? Were there people there that were absolutely convinced it would be the masterclass whitewash and close to massacre that it was before?
No, only massive, biased fans would say that. Good. I would say, but I spoke to Antonio Tarver this week.
You're such a name dropper. It's relentless name dropping.
As you do, in between Derek James and Dan Raphael, know my life, what my life's like. But he was saying that I wouldn't be shocked if it was like a Hagler Hearns type fight where they go for it. And it wasn't quite that, but it did start faster than it was more competitive. That second round, when obviously Spence gets dropped, you think, hang on a minute, is he right? He wasn't right. I would go as far to say it was the most enjoyable and best one-sided fight that I've been ringside at. I would say that it was beautiful to watch. In a fight, this was a fight that was going to it wasn't a 50-50 fight when it didn't transpire that way.
Yep.
But it was still great to watch. You knew you were watching greatness, Steve. He was he was something special, and we knew how good he was. But against another great fighter, you can't always show the greatness in you. You have to dig it out. But he did, and he made a great fighter look very, very ordinary.
Terence Crawford, just to recap for one or two people that are perhaps not fully aware of what this man has achieved and the way he's achieved it. He wasn't a silver spoon fighter. He had to beg his promoters for this fight, that fight, took a couple of risks. He turned professional in 2008. So that's 16 years he's been a professional. He's not an overnight star. Some people might be waking up this morning or waking up and thinking, oh, wow, he's suddenly, an overnight star. That's not the case. 35 years of age. That was his 40th fight. That was his 8th consecutive stoppage as a welterweight. Every single one of his 8 welterweight fights have ended by stoppage. And he won his first world title back in 2014. And if I'm not mistaken, Barry, many years ago when you and I were in working under different circumstances, did we not have Terence Crawford on our old ESPN pod a trillion years ago?
We did, Steve. Yeah, we did. Well done. I forgot all about that. We did. Yeah,
24.
We did.
You know what, Barry? We should be able to retire on our laurels, you and I. 2014, when the BBC hadn't even heard a podcast, we're interviewing the man in Scotland before he fights Ricky Burns for the title.
I would say, Steve, that your podcasts are better with me. I'm not saying anything silly. Just saying,
Well,
I
Barry,
compliment you superbly. I would say this much.
Go on, son.
He mentioned Ricky Burns and said that was still his favourite performance. That was still
Wow.
the highlight of his life.
Yeah, because I remember at the time you really fancying Crawford to win that fight, and me looking back on a couple of fights he'd had before that, thinking, no, I just think Ricky will know too much. On the night, it was a brilliant performance from Crawford. It was controlled. Ricky Burns fought out of his skin because he's a good fighter, but it was masterful on that night. That's a word, masterful and masterclass. Those are words that it seems to me that we're going to hear thrown around. And we'll talk about rematches, and we'll talk about where he goes a little bit later in the pod, babe. But I've got to ask you, let's take you back again. I'm sorry to be all over the place. That's what happens when you're watching fights at 6 o'clock or 5:15 in the morning. He came into the ring with two things: Eminem on his left, and he was draped in a fishing net. Is that because he was trying to catch a big fish, and obviously Eminem's there because he likes Eminem? And what was your initial reaction, Barry? Because you and I have never talked about modern culture and music and stuff. What was your Eminem reaction, big boy?
Well, I got a pretty wide range of musical taste, Steve, and rap is slightly one of them. But
Barry Jones was lost for words there. Lost for words.
I was trying to say eclectic. I want to say we used the word eclectic, but I'm right. I would have got it wrong. But it was, yeah, it had that star feel like we always have in these big fights. You're not quite sure what sort of feel you have. It was officially announced that it was 19,990 people there, so that's pretty much sold out. There did seem to be empty seats at the top, I would say, but
Yeah.
But either way, that was the official sales, and so it was packed out. It was really, I would say, the crowd on some of the undercard fights. They on the big screen they showed Spence. The crowd cheered. They showed Crawford, and the crowd went crazy.
Did that surprise you, Barry?
It massively surprised me. It did.
Wow,
but then,
okay.
come the fight, Spence had the crowd initially.
Oh, okay.
But then obviously with the way the performance was, with the fight was going, the performance of Crawford, they muted and it was all pro Crawford in the end there. But yeah, it had that big feel. Though Eminem didn't sing, but he was next to him and they played his song, 8 Mile, and it was tremendous. And Spence's walk was really raucous as well. And it was it's like you're there, you can go to a million fights. We've been to some of the biggest fights, in the last 10, 15 years, and a little bit longer. But you get that shiver of excitement. And
if you don't get it, there's something wrong with you, and you're in the wrong business.
It is, yeah. The only funny story I would say about tonight was our producer Patrick, who literally produced miracles to get me accreditation, was sat up in the gods, and I had the seat of all seats. So that was. I don't know if I'm happy or sad about that. Really, he broke his back to get me in there, in here, and Yeah.
Well, actually,
he was sat on the roof with a pair of binoculars looking through the window.
If I could take a little bit of credit, all you did was take my accreditation. So had I not been in Telford...
I didn't want to say this. I didn't want to embarrass you, but you were sat with him, and then when they changed it to my name, they moved me on because they said, how many fights have Bunce won? Being Fitzroy Junior of the Year in 1979 means nothing when you're in Las Vegas, mate.
Barry, all I can say is that you're mildly delirious from watching a fight that you've been looking forward to for so long. I tell you, let's pause here. Let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll look at. I want to look at Derek James's actions and whether or not he should have called it off. But more than that, we'll look at. And I hate to do this, we've got to throw it forward. Let's take a pause.
Jill Scott's Coffee Club.
We are back. I'm so excited for the second series, Ben.
It's going to be so exciting. Big.
Jill, you are not allowed to leave camp that way.
So I was constantly getting in trouble.
Jill Scott's Coffee Club. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Okay, Barry, so let me ask you this. You talked about the doctors being up in the corner, which is a standard New York and Nevada Commission thing. Doctors, in fact, sometimes they're a little bit intrusive. They get sometimes a bit too far, especially in New York. They're in your face. They want to talk to the boxer for 10 seconds, which is a valuable 10 seconds when you've only got really about 55 or 50 seconds once the boxer gets back. But did you think, Barry, and I'm talking about from your prime position, not Paddy, because he was up in the gods, all he could see was a couple of geezers flying around the ring, and it could have been flyweights for all he knows. But when did you think maybe at the end of the 7th that there's an argument here for Derek James making a mercy call? And this is not. I don't want you to be an after timer. I want you to put hand on heart and tell me.
To be honest, I didn't. Looking back, I should have felt that way, but I was so engrossed in the performance that I was just. What I did think, the biggest thing in my head was thinking, Crawford's taking his time here. Crawford could have finished that from round 6. I felt before the knockdowns in 7, he systematically picked him apart.
Wow,
and
enjoyed it.
He took his time doing it, Steve. And
wow,
that's I know great fighters have that malice about them. You know, they just like, I could do it, but I want to do it this way.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make sure he was really gone. And maybe that's a bit of respect for Spence. But they could have picked him up. They could have pulled him out. But this is a super fight, Steve.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
And because Spence does fire back, and he did throughout the fight, even though there's every round, that success waned more and more. It depleted massively. He still landed with a shot now and again. And so I think, you're so engrossed in it. I understand you're so engrossed in it as a coach because you're part of the fight. You don't see that, and you're in it. It takes someone else in your corner should say, listen, have a word here, mate. He's getting beat up.
And Barry, what about the crowd by that? Because obviously there's the anticipation all week, the anticipation on the night. There's the brilliant ring walks of Eminem side by side with Crawford and songs playing. The atmosphere's there. Everyone's hyped up. Had Crawford not only tamed Spence, but had the crowd calmed down, or did it stay 19,990? Did they stay at fever pitch?
Yeah, there was enough Crawford fans there to keep it noisy, so that it was fine. It was a great atmosphere all throughout the night. It was absolutely brilliant all through the fight. Every time a big punch landed, you get that whoa, and when Crawford would go on the offensive, throwing those combinations, nasties with those punches as well. Yeah. The crowd were on their feet. Everyone was excited. It had everything about it had the feel of a great fight. It was, and it wasn't the great fight that we thought.
Sure.
But it was a great performance.
It was a great fight, yeah.
It was a great performance.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps there's, one of the things I think you and I talked about earlier in the pod earlier in the week, or maybe it was off air, was the fact that there was an awful lot of pressure placed on this fight to be a Hagler-Hearns, to be a Hearns and Leonard. And I think that was unfair pressure, to be perfectly honest with you. Let's get it right. It was a lot better than Mayweather-Pacquiao, the last massive welterweight fight that took place in that city.
It was more Hopkins, Trinidad.
Which was a genius masterclass.
Yeah,
which
or
missed.
Or Hopkins, Kelly Pavlik even.
Again, you missed all of those. I saw those. I mean, what you're doing, Barry, is you're feeding off my relaxed carcass. I'm not quite finished yet, my son. Let me ask you this. Ding ding. It's the start of the 9th round. Are you thinking here? Because, I'm looking at it, and obviously I'm a genius. I know the result before I'm watching the fight, so that's different. But I'm looking at, and Spence looks increasingly hurt and increasingly troubled by whatever Crawford's hitting him with. So it's a perfect stoppage by the ref. But were you thinking, as that round unfolded, as the seconds ticked, that we might be in the last round of this great fight?
Yeah, in the 8th round, like he was doing it all throughout the fight. He was doing body feints. Now, you feint with your feet, and it brings your body forward. But he was keeping his feet there, Crawford, and sort of shuddering his body, and Spence was reacting.
Oh,
and
that's not good.
What Crawford did have was the strength. We didn't think he would have the advantage. It was the strength, and it showed a lot in the 8th round. He was just so strong. The jab again was busting him up again in that round, and it was evident. And you were starting to think. When it was not, I wasn't. Again, I should have been thinking this. I had no empathy in me at all. I feel ashamed, but I should have been thinking why in the corner throwing the towel in. But I was thinking, when's Crawford going to put his foot down? Because the fight that he was there for the taking. I felt Spence maybe a round before that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So it had that sense of inevitability that it's just a matter of time now before he rallies a combination. And that's what happened in the 9th round.
Yeah, it was quite a vicious ending as well, because even with the final punches, as the referee's poised to stop it, Crawford, even at that point, is taking his time. And had the referee not stopped it, and had Errol Spence stayed on his feet and not gone down in the remaining seconds, you just get the idea that Crawford would have gone back and increased it in the 10th. I mean, you mentioned, I think, the word chilling, and I'll add to that calculated. But we've known this about Crawford. We're not new to the Terence Bud Crawford business. It's all very well everybody calling him a gentleman and a nice guy. He's a vicious operator in the ring. I've seen him up close from ringside and watched him take people apart. And I think he takes great pleasure in what he does in that ring, Barry.
And Steve, the way he punches, I mentioned this earlier on in the week, the way he punches with those front 2 knuckles, and he lifts the elbow up and chips down, not big like Golovkin, but he does that. So every shot he hits you with, that is in a smaller space with the 2 knuckles. He chops down with it. He gets that whip. Every punch you feel. So that I think everyone is surprised by his power, because he doesn't seem to put a lot of leverage into it. And also he leans back, so he puts the weight. He gets that swing like a crane, if you like. He gets that looping swing on the shots. So he generates power with little movements. And those 3 right hooks that put Spence down didn't look that heavy. But again, because he punches like that and turns his hand right over,
they don't have to look heavy.
Well, they are, but they're just so concussive.
Absolutely. Barry, let me ask you this: once it was over, before the fight, they're embracing that great moment at the weigh-in when they shook hands and they congratulated each other on making history, making the fight, and, as Errol Spence said, making bank, i.e. making loads and loads of money. And let's hope they make absolute fortunes. Guaranteed 10 million. Maybe they could double that with pay-per-view sales and other sales. What was it like from where you were sitting in the ring? I mean, was there any malice, animosity, or was everybody celebrating, if that's the right word, the event?
Yeah, I think with the fighters, we expected what it was. Respect. Crawford went right up to him. Obviously, the ring fills up with 1 million people, as always. That should never happen, but it does. And it was, you are a little bit worried that, because the families have been arguing and fighting.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, but they weren't. I think, I just think everyone accepted it for what it was. But them two were really respectful, to both fighters. And then after Crawford had gone up to Spence and said, whatever he said to him, a great fight or whatever, he went to the other side of the ring and started dancing with his mum.
Yeah, which is, of course, a bit of a bone of contention, because Derek James has said, tell your mum not to pack her dancing shoes, which everybody in the Crawford gang, and it seems everybody in the entire Omaha, Nebraska region took personally. So, Barry, let's deal with a couple of things here, because I appreciate that you've had a long day out there in Las Vegas in the sun watching one of the greatest fights in history from a ringside seat, and you must be exhausted, you poor little.
Did you say from my ring? Did you say from my ringside seat?
Yeah, from your ringside seat. Yeah, I'm not including the aerial boy there. He might as well have been in a helicopter somewhere. Barry, let me ask you this. First of all, where does it sit in not just in welterweight history, but in recent Las Vegas history. You've seen a couple of giant fights. In fact, you've seen several giant fights there in the last 8 or 9 or 10 years. Where do you think it sits in history?
Because it was so one-sided, Steve, you can't put it at the top bracket. You can't, because it was a really good
Very
fight,
honest.
an intriguing fight to watch. It was a brilliant performance. But it was too one-sided to say that. That was how no one thought it was going to be that. So it was brilliant in its own way, because we got to see the now pound for pound number one. I would say now clearly dominate. Who the man who could have been pound for pound number one if he would have won tonight. A man, genuine 50-50 fight that was going to, even if he won, and he was a big. Most people thought he was going to win, but it was always going to be a tight, hard fight. And it wasn't.
Now, let's do now, which some people might go, oh, no, Bunty, don't take anything away from Crawford's win. Let's look at perhaps what's gone wrong or what went wrong with Spence. We know he was in a really bad car crash a couple of years ago that damaged his jaw and damaged most of his teeth. So we know that happened. We know he was unconscious. We know it was a slow road back. We know that he had a damaged eye, which put him out again. We know he's been inactive. And we know that he does have a struggle, even though he looked good on the scouts. Let's not do any revisionist history. He didn't look like a drawn ghost on the scouts. So we know those things: the car crash, the eye injury, the inactivity, and the fact that he struggles to make weight. Are you going to allow any of those to be a factor in the assessment you've just given me on Crawford's masterclass?
That question, though not so long, was posed in the post-fight press conference.
There's no need for that. There's no need for that reference.
Anyway,
that question, just not so long, was posed in the post-fight press conference. What a put down for Barry Jones!
I thought you were going to answer your own question. Then.
No, not sure.
But anyway, it was posed to him in the post-fight press conference to Errol Spence, and he said, making weight is always hard, so I can't use it as an excuse. I got beat by the better fighter.
Yeah.
But he also did say, I won't be fighting a welterweight again.
Yeah.
And I got to go and talk to my team and the rest of it. But he wants the rematch.
Yeah.
And he wants it at 154.
Yeah, Barry.
I don't know if go on.
Sorry for interrupting you, but what do you understand about this kind of semi-unique rematch clause? It can go both ways, win or lose, both men. What's your understanding of that?
Yeah, well, I'm led to believe, and again, I'm not privy to private conversation, but I'm led to believe that anyone can revoke it. So if Spence, even the loser, which is bizarre in its own right, especially in a contest that was so conclusively one-sided, so he wants the rematch. It'll be 154, and that was asked to Crawford, and he said he would be happy to move up, but he's not looking to move up.
So Barry, sorry for interrupting you. Will the rematch be at 154, which is light middleweight or super welterweight, whatever you want to call it, and not at welterweight? Is that your understanding? In which case, it could be a non-title fight, or it would be a non-title fight at the moment. That's
what Spence wants. He wants to move to 154. Obviously, that might be up to Crawford, but then Dan Rafael asked if he would be able to get up for another Spence fight after winning so conclusively, so easily, as he put it. And Crawford, a typical Crawford answer, said, I never take anyone lightly. I train as hard for any fight, and you've seen that over my career.
Absolutely.
And he will as well, I think. I think he has that inner fire in him that he wants to be the best every time he gets in the ring.
It's like a mentality thing with Crawford. So as much as he's a superstar, as much as he does all of this incredible work inside his community, and trust me, in the next 6 months, lots of the world's media are going to be making homage to Omaha, Nebraska, to just get an insight into what exactly he does. They're going to be going down the Mark Kriegel route, because if you're going to name drop American journalists, I'll name drop American journalists. Mark Kriegel has been exploring...
I was speaking to Kriegel last night in the Top Rank show.
Enough. By the way, yeah. So we know what Crawford's done, and he treats every fight like it's his one big chance at the big time. Even though he's fully established, he's made more money than he and all of his family and his kids could ever spend. But he goes into every fight like this is his big break. And if he were to lose, and this gives you an indication of where he really was, because he was on the wrong side of boxing's tracks, remember, before he had a couple of wins and then got that fight with Ricky Burns. He fights every fight like it could be the last, and it's the one that sets him back. And that's what, as you say, there's a degree of professionalism about him. So, Barry, in summary, let's start to close this down, because I know that you've had a tough old day and you've probably got a tough old night somewhere. You're probably going to see a lounge singer somewhere down at the Palms or something like that, something exotico. Let me ask you this, Barry. What you saw of Spence last night, will the move up in weight have any effect on what might happen if, or should I say when, they have a rematch? Sorry for another long question, by the way. Apologies in advance.
Very delicate you are. I think maybe possibly, Spence could maybe last a few, the distance with it, but I just think, no, I don't, Steve. I don't. I'm trying to find a way, but I don't. The way Crawford used that jab and the way he was just so comfortable up close at range, and the speed, and once he punches off your punches. I've said this before, but he does it so well. And no, I don't think he'll ever beat Crawford. I don't. Crawford is the king of the world right now, Steve. Yeah. In boxing, he's the one. That was as good as a performance I've seen in a very long time. At this level, like, this is a different level. Like, you know, this is the creme de la creme of boxing, and he breezed it. I'm excited now. Again, he breezed it. He wasn't even hard for him in no shape or form. Nothing. Totally. There wasn't even a sweat on him.
Yeah, no, listen, I completely and utterly agree with you. And now let's just throw it a little bit forward if we can, and let's move away from a rematch, although I think that's inevitable. We saw that with George Kambosos against Devin Haney, those two fights that took place when Kambosos lost comfortably to Haney, wasn't even in the fight, and somehow managed to invoke the rematch clause, got the fight again and wasn't in that fight, but he didn't get hurt, bashed up, dropped and stopped, but he still got beat comfortably. So there are a couple of other fights. Let's throw this forward, and I hate to do this on fight night. It's one of the perils, really, is that you have to stop celebrating what we've seen and throw it forward. There's a couple of things. First of all, there would have been Jamel Charlo, who's got all of the belts at light middleweight, but of course he's fighting Canelo Alvarez. That would have been a nice fight, and it might still be a nice fight down the line. But what about the two other welterweights? Because I think these two, the main two welterweight challengers, contenders, I think that they are, and that's Boots Ennis, unbeaten in 31-28 quick, Virgil Ortiz Jr., unbeaten in 19 knockouts or stoppages. I think those two and their development over the last couple of years, I think that pushed the two guys into the ring, to be perfectly honest with you, because they couldn't, in my opinion, I don't think Crawford and Spence could have carried on making defences without fighting one of those, and they had to have their super fight first. So are Ennis, Ortiz and maybe Jamel Charlo also options, in your opinion, another long question, for Terence Crawford?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Jaron Ennis fight is the one I want to see, because he's an absolute superstar, I feel, and he is the future of the division. And but the way Crawford performed tonight, I don't know if he can beat Crawford. But that's the fight. That's the fight. Yeah. So you ever said about where will you put the winner? Above or the greatest welterweights who've ever lived, who ever walked the earth, who ever boxed. And this fight doesn't get him in the top 6 or 7. I don't think. Certainly top 5. Yeah. But a win over some up-and-coming superstar who will be a world champion, that will cement his legacy as clearly a top 10 welterweight who's ever lived. That's
a great point. But let's also point out that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and even Saturday, until this fight was stopped, neither Terence Crawford or, in my opinion, Errol Spence could be considered the best pound for pound, that lovely fictitious piece of fantasy that's out there, pound for pound fighter in the world. That was, I think, from Tuesday morning until last night, Naoya Inoue, the brilliant Japanese guy who moved up, who's now won world titles at 4 weights, moved up to super bantam on Tuesday morning and annihilated unbeaten world champion Stephen Thornton. He was the pound for pound best fighter for 4 days. I'm not sure if that's the shortest reign, because it's a fantasy reign, it doesn't count. But without a doubt, Crawford took that title last night in that 9th round.
Yeah, he did. And the difference being, Stephen Thornton's a really good fighter, but he's not Errol Spence. And he has got Errol Spence's resume, and that's the difference. No, Inoue totally dominated and dismantled a really good fighter. Terence Crawford totally dominated and dismantled a great fighter.
Yeah, big difference.
And that's why you got to put him number 1.
Okay, Barry. Now, before we talk a little bit about Telford, which I'm going to have to do because it was a shocking ending. So, what's your overriding memory from your little holiday in Las Vegas alongside Paddy, the two of you swanning around, helicopter boys, poolside kings? What's your overriding memory, Barry?
There's been so many, Steve. You know, listen to Al Bernstein have it singing in a lounge. Having our producer Paddy rubbing some sort of what did I have on my head, Paddy? I had some sort of dirt or something. I've been walking around rubbing my head, and on the elevators outside, going down. I got my hand in, and they're stinking. All those rubber, all the rubber come off the dirt.
Melting.
They're rubbing on my head.
The elevators are melting.
I on the top of my head was black, and I've gone for a meal with Paddy and his partner, and I've had to rub it off. That was a highlight or a low light.
A low light.
No, I tell you what. I turned up for a suit. There's another thing. I turned up in a suit today. I got to the arena, turned back and walked away because it was too hot, and got dressed again in a t-shirt and a pair of trousers. But the highlight, the press conference was fantastic.
It was
nasty enough without getting silly. It was good. The weigh-in was really good, surprisingly, and it filled up really good, and that gave you the big fight feel. But the performance of Terence Crawford was just, I like when I see a master at work, I get so excited. I won't sleep tonight. That's the truth. It wasn't one of those fights where you stay there all night, but I won't sleep tonight at all. I don't know what I'll do to keep me occupied, but that the memory of that fight, going through that performance was great. We had a good night, and also get in a better seat. People saying, I'm glad you're here, not Steve Bunce. And
that's always nice to hear.
Yeah, you're much better looking, and all that sort of stuff, pretty much. Yeah.
All the usual stuff I hear, but I hear it in reverse.
To be fair, when I do get recognised, it's very rarely, as you know, but when I do, I always get, oh, Barry, where's Steve? I'm like, I've had this. My older brother Steve used to get the same when I was a kid. Oh, yeah, Barry, where's Steve? Now I'm getting it as an adult, and it's you.
In all fairness, Barry, I was in Telford. And I get the same stuff. People were asking me last night in Telford. So Barry, he's in Las Vegas. Oh, I thought you were serious. Anyway, let me just finish this pod from Las Vegas with a little bit of a story from Telford. Because it was a brilliant performance by Liam Davis, local kid, 14th fight. He's had some good wins, and he managed to stop Jason Cunningham. And Liam retained his British and his European super bantamweight title, stopped him in a round. Exactly. Now, I think you had a bit of not a shock with your win, but a shock with the nature and the dominance. I'm even more shocked by that from ringside, and I was quite staggered. It was a brilliant performance by Liam Davis.
Yeah, well, he was a favourite in the fight, Steve.
Favourite in the fight, yep.
But not like that.
I agree.
That's a real statement. He's a talent, that kid. He's really good to watch. But that's a real statement of intent where he's going to go. And that's a real. You can push forward from that now, Steve. That's a fantastic win.
It was indeed. So that was Telford, and yes, Steve Bunce was in Telford doing his work, and Barry was in Las Vegas doing his work. Loving every second of it.
It just sounds right.
Yeah, Barry was in Las Vegas. Boy, I tell you what, Barry, I just kept all week, all I've seen are the amount of people that were there. Now, I'm not saying there were more celebrities, boxing celebrities, than were at some of the Mayweather fights, but it did have a sensational, a ridiculous feel to it. And I hold my hands up. I'm outrageously envious and wish I'd have been there with you. And I would have waved to you because you'd have been up in the gods with Paddy in the popcorn seats, row Z.
Do you know why I love American shows when I go there? Because, I'm a basketball. I love basketball.
You do, don't you?
I'm mad on it. But they love their boxing. So Damian Lillard, who's actually could be a pundit, he's so knowledgeable about his boxing. He's there. It's just brilliant. Just seeing all the basketball stars there. Stephen A. Smith, they call it the American Bunce. They call him, I think.
He makes about $7 million a year. What are you talking about? You're insulting him. He does.
It's 10 million a year, actually.
But yeah.
Who's counting, eh? But yeah, it had that big fight feel, and I think it didn't deliver the way that we thought, but I think it delivered enough. Because we seen a true great tonight, crowned.
And on that, Barry, we might finish. Barry Jones, you've been brilliant all week, not just with us here on the BBC, but across everything you've done. You've Absolutely smashed it, as they say in the trade. Barry was ringside to witness what can only be, and I'll use the word for the 15th or 16th time, a masterclass from the ultimate top cat, the cool cat, Bud Crawford, the king of all Omaha, and right now the king of all boxing. Terence Crawford, we salute you. We love you. You're brilliant. You're quite brilliant. I've been Steve Bunce, and this has been a special BBC 5 Live boxing podcast from Las Vegas and somewhere else.
I'm Morgan Freeman, and this is 6 Degrees from Jamie and Spencer.
You know what, Spence?
What?
I have pulled out some big names for our podcast recently.
What on earth are you talking about?
J-Lo, Morgan Freeman, Samuel Jackson, dare I say more? They came on cause, apparently, rumour has it, they love me.
You know that they're only talking to you to get to me.
Whoa. I'm producer Phil. I'm the one that gets us the A-list guests around here.
So, join us for the podcast that's all about making new friends and have lots of fun on the way.
And hopefully we stay friends too.
Beautiful.
6 Degrees from Jamie and Spencer.
This is going to be amazing.
Only on BBC Sounds.